And I want to say this to the television audience, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook.
Hi, my name is Eric Harrison, and welcome to my nonpartisan, neutral news channel, Political Tricks, where I mean to uncover all the sneaky little tricks that politicians and the media use on both sides of the aisle to prevent us from having a functioning democracy. So welcome to the world of Political Tricks.
Why do they hate us? They hate our freedoms.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
You're saying
violent. So if you
saying
want
women
domination,
to dominate, right? So you're saying basically. So you're saying well, that's just a fact.
no, no, I'm not saying that at all.
Well, you know what? I won't hold you on here any longer because you probably could use some water
Sorry.
there.
So the political trick we're going to look at today is the faulty analogy. The faulty analogy is a logical fallacy that assumes that if two or more things are similar in one respect, then they must also be similar in other respects or other properties as well. And this is a very common logical fallacy that are used by most people. I remember when I was a kid, I was a young kid. I was in the neighborhood and I saw this adult, prancing down the street in a cape, and I was like, "Hey, look, there's a superhero. He must be off to fight crime." I mean, for all I know, this guy was off to fight the guards who were trying to take him back to Bellevue Mental Hospital. You know what I mean? I mean, just because they're similar in one respect doesn't mean, they're similar in other respects as well. And so that's basically how this logical fallacy works. So for our first example of the faulty analogy, we're going to take a look at a town hall that was conducted by News Nation for Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is still running for president at the time in 2024. And what we see here is in the discussion, psychiatric drugs and mass shootings are brought up. And Robert F. Kennedy suggests that possibly psychiatric drugs might be responsible for some of the mass shootings. And the moderator pushes back on this. And when the moderator pushes back on this is when we see the faulty analogy get used. So let's take a look.
We also need to look at the contribution, particularly with the school shootings, of some of these psychiatric drugs. I'm not saying they're causing it, but I'm saying there is evidence they are, and that evidence.
What's that evidence?
Well, part of the evidence includes the fact that for SSRIs, almost all of them have on their manufacturer's inserts among the listed side effects are homicidal and suicidal behavior.
That doesn't mean antidepressants caused any of these people to commit mass shootings
in a school. Of course it doesn't.
Okay.
But we ought to be looking at it, shouldn't we? Shouldn't we be looking at video games and cell phones and some of the social, social media stuff? We should be looking at all these things, including the SSRIs. And by the way, there are studies out there that indicate a higher percentage of the people who committed these school violence were on SSRIs.
Yeah, well, there are also like tens and tens of millions of Americans on antidepressants who don't commit mass shootings.
Well, of course, and there are people who smoke cigarettes and don't get cancer. So, but shouldn't we be looking? Shouldn't we be looking at those things? I mean, it's.
So what we see here is a moderator push back on RFK Jr. by saying that, there are millions of people who are on antidepressants and they don't exhibit any of this kind of behavior. So he must be wrong in this assertion. But I think she's making a faulty analogy here, because what she's missing is the fact that, people they react to medication differently. And the faulty analogy she's making is saying that just because these humans over here are not exhibiting any of those kind of behaviors, that also means that these humans over here should also not be exhibiting any of these kind of behaviors from the same medication. And we just know that's just not true. We know that people react to medication differently. And not only is she wrong in that, but she's also wrong in suggesting that, antidepressants are the same as antipsychotic SSRIs, which is what RFK was pointing to. And furthermore, she's saying that, correlation is not causation. And I mean, that's like the fancy thing that people say is, be careful, correlation is not causation. But RFK Jr. is saying, well, hold on. We do know that correlation can be a clue to causation. And the way we know that is because There's millions of people who smoke cigarettes and they don't get any kind of, they don't get cancer, but we all know that cigarettes can cause cancer. So, that is the correct kind of logical progression of thought there, where she's making the faulty analogy by just assuming that just because both people are humans and that they're both taking medication, that the larger group doesn't have any kind of, reaction to that medication. So that must mean that this other group, that the medication they're taking can't possibly be causing any of this kind of stuff. And that is a classic example of a faulty analogy. And so for our last example of the faulty analogy, we're going to take a look at Bill Maher's podcast, Club Random, where Bill Maher and Seth MacFarlane are discussing the vaccine and the concept of natural immunity. So let's take a look.
Like, even if you had the disease, you still had to get a vaccine. That's powerful, stupid. They don't do that in Europe.
I think they do that here. There's mandatory vaccination in schools.
Right, but if you already had the disease, you have natural immunity. We didn't seem to believe in that.
That was debunked, though. That's
not debunked.
Don't you know people who've had COVID 4 or 5 times? I do. That's not natural immunity. There's no immunity there. You've had COVID 5 times.
So what we see here is Seth MacFarlane make the faulty analogy that natural immunity is expressed the same across the board. That the way that your body, gets a natural immunity from something like chickenpox should be the same way that your body gets a natural immunity from something like COVID-19 or the flu. And that's just not the case. If you get the chickenpox, you're most likely not going to get it again. And that happens with most people. But COVID-19 and the flu, those kind of viruses, they're a lot more dynamic. They mutate over time and they change, and then they come around and kind of test the body again. And but your body isn't like completely starting from scratch. So your body might get reinfected again, and it kind of has to update its knowledge on this new variant. But it still has a form of natural immunity there, because I'll post a study here, but your body has memory cells of the old, of its old encounter with the original virus. And those memory cells sit around in places like the lymph nodes. I'm not exactly sure of the details, but they dynamically change over time, so that when you experience this new variant, it's kind of able to, in some cases, able to deal with it. So it's kind of like developing its own, response to possible variants over time. So it's fascinating, and that's one of the reasons why, if you get infected again, depending on the variant, there might be very dangerous variants out there that kind of override all this. I don't know the science of this, so don't take my word for exactly all this. But that if you do get infected again, you will most likely be okay, because your body has already had experience with some form of the original disease. And so that is also natural immunity. So what we're basically seeing here is a mistaken assumption that if natural immunity works in one way with one disease, it should work in the same way with another. And that's a classic example of a faulty analogy. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. And don't forget to comment, like, and most of all, please subscribe. Thank you so much.
Let's go, let's go, let's go! Get your hands where I can see them! Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and please don't forget to vote!